Excuse me? Did you just ask what was BGK Network for? I'm glad that you asked. Let me get the number up because I know you're going to call. So, BGK was founded by Michael. What happened to the number? The number's at the top of the screen now. But anyway, get the number. As I was saying, BGK Network was founded by... It's at the bottom of the screen. Really? Really? Okay. I'm sorry for calling you Michael. Apostle, just put me back where I can talk. Just put me back, please. Wow, some people are so sensitive, right? But seriously, what you just saw was a sample of what Apostle Michael Dulaney and Evangelist Tiffany can do through virtual ministry with BGK Network. They founded BGK to help people like you and myself to put the gospel out around the world. It's a great opportunity. I do encourage you to call the number. It's more affordable than you think. Give them a call. I did.
BGK 24/7 Online Christian TV Network. Making what was once impossible, possible.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of In View with Sam DiNardo. Sadly, DiNardo's not here today, but I have an amazing guest with me today, Detective Joseph Scarmucci. Many of you will remember him from our gala last year, and we are looking forward to talking to him today about what he's been up to and what he's got planned in the next couple of months. Welcome, Joe. It's so good to see you here again.
Yeah, same to you. Thanks.
Thanks so much for being here. You are all over the place all the time, so I'm really looking forward to hearing some of what you've been up to recently. So tell us a little bit about what's going on in the world of Detective Scarmucci right now.
Busy as always. I just actually, night before last, got back from a stay in Ukraine and Poland. So we were there working anti-trafficking and intervening on some people trying to commit some not good things.
Yeah, no, for real. I've definitely heard that things are rough in the refugee camps and on the borders right now. Can you confirm some of the stuff that you've seen? Within reason for what you can share.
Yeah, so I can tell you that the refugee camps, at least the ones that I went to, which were primarily from the Mendyka border in Shimish and then in another town, were actually really nice. I was surprised when I got there. I was expecting something not well, but the people were really well taken care of. They were really clean, nice. It wasn't overly overcrowded. It wasn't too bad, but in terms of just sheer number of people. But they were good. It's, when you're looking at the border itself on the Ukrainian side, there's a backup of women and children trying to get across that are standing in line for hours on end. But when they do actually cross into Poland, everything they could imagine is there, just waiting for them. So that's a really good sign.
That's really good to hear, because obviously I've seen some of the sensationalization happening on social media, and you and I have a passion for the lack of sensationalization of trafficking.
And that's not to say though that maybe in other countries that the treatment isn't as well, or that some of the places to stay are not as nice as these were, but from what I saw and the ones that I went to, they were definitely much better than I expected.
Very much so. Okay. So we're seeing obviously a lot, and we at Rahab started as a not engaging in working in the Ukraine at all, but we know that what other really amazing organizations are and some that you work with. Can you tell us a little bit about those and what they're up to? Because we'd obviously like to help them out.
Yeah, I went with Unbound, which is a faith-based organization. Their world headquarters is in Waco, Texas. They've got offices throughout the U.S. They've got them in South Africa, Mongolia, I believe some other foreign countries as well. But we went with them, and they were really the driving force behind that. But we went and worked with them. I also, through that channel, was able to work with an organization called Collective Liberty that's based in DC. They were able to provide us with intelligence information as we were, identifying the potential traffickers, being able to identify some of their social media accounts to let us know if they're Russian or not. And then they were keeping us up with daily briefs about, what they were finding.
Sure. And I mean, that's really important. I love that you guys are working together because that's such an important part of just sharing information. Because we know that the traffickers are pretty well connected and they share information all the time. So it's really important that people on the other side are equally good at sharing, right?
Yeah. Nobody can do it alone.
Absolutely. And anyone who thinks they can obviously isn't doing a very good job. So for sure, it's important that we're all working together in this fight. And obviously, there's a lot of different pieces to this, not just in the Ukraine, but also here in the U.S., right? And you fight trafficking on a daily basis here stateside. Can you tell us a little bit about what that looks like?
Yeah, I mean, it's eerily similar, no matter where you're at. There's always nuance, but the reality is trafficking, is pretty consistent across the board. My day-to-day is pretty much spent, doing operations. We're constantly doing those, and hopefully making an impact with survivors, but definitely putting traffickers in jail and in prison. I get to work for a boss that lets me do my job. And if I need to, a couple of weeks ago, I needed to go to LA to make a couple arrests and search warrants. And, he told me to get on a plane. So we spent a lot of time traveling, a lot of time on the road. Next week, we'll be in New Orleans helping them out with some cases they have. So it's, it's nice being able to really proactively do our own work, but then also be able to help other agencies that need it as well.
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, obviously, it's always good to see law enforcement working together across different, state and federal borders and everybody working together. I've certainly been on the end of that where it didn't happen, right? And so it's really important to see more of that sharing of information and, those sorts of things happening. But I think one of the things that, we even saw this week is that law enforcement sometimes doesn't know what to do when they encounter different types of trafficking, right? So we had a young lady in the last couple of weeks that was brought over from Brazil to be a mail-order bride, basically, right? And so she thought she was coming for a job to be a nanny and go to school. She's an industrial engineer in her home country and came over because she thought that she wanted to learn English so she could do data science more. And her plan was to be a nanny and go to school and become a data scientist. Okay, that sounds great. Till she arrived and, obviously the gentleman he unfortunately lost his, wife to COVID and had some challenges and whatever and was struggling with the child and ended up just basically holding her hostage in the house for a couple of months, looking after the kid. And she had tried to explain this to law enforcement, who obviously didn't really understand her broken English and other things. And then she had to get her embassy involved to get some help to get out, who then obviously involved other local Chicago agencies who involved us. And we were able to, take her to safety and all that kind of thing. But what we find most interesting in these cases is that law enforcement doesn't really understand some of the nuances of these things. And I, as a law enforcement officer, I know you're passionate on this subject, and I would love to hear, what do you have to say to other law enforcement officers in these sorts of situations?
Oh gosh, the number one thing is check your pride and your ego at the door. That's a hard thing for cops, but you have to. I think one of our biggest hindrances to investigations and to really, helping survivors is quite literally our egos. It's okay to not know how to investigate something. I didn't know how to investigate certain crimes until I learned. I spent 7 years prior to doing this as a death and sex crime investigator. So, I didn't walk in one day and just know how to work a murder. It took time. Likewise, with trafficking, we view it oftentimes as, if it's sex trafficking, law enforcement tends to view it as prostitution, right? She's wanting to be a prostitute. That's the craziest thing I've ever heard in my entire life. Like, nobody makes that choice. Even if they're doing it what we would call consensually, that choice is probably the last choice. So we have to really look at it and say, if you have such limited choices, is it really a choice? It's not. When we look at labor trafficking, one of the number one responses is, well, it's better than where they came from. They chose to come here. This is obviously better than Brazil. It's the United States of America. She chose this, or he chose this, as well, especially with labor. So really setting that notion aside and understanding that, yes, they did come in search of a better life, but it didn't lead to that. It didn't end up that way. So it doesn't negate, no matter what choices were made that led to the trafficking, it doesn't negate the fact that when that exploitation began, it's trafficking. It's a crime. It's doesn't matter if they turned left when they should have turned right. And it doesn't take away or make them any less of a victim or survivor of trafficking.
Yeah, no, I mean, for sure. I personally, obviously am a survivor of trafficking and have had those encounters. I know the paradigm is shifting. Certainly when I was arrested multiple times for prostitution, nobody even asked, right? Like, it wasn't a thing. It was, oh, you naughty girl, off you go kind of thing. Mm-hmm. At least today there's a little bit more empathy, a little bit more of the favorite buzzword right now of trauma informed, right? Everybody wants to be informed.
Yeah, well, and worse than that is victim centered. We spend so much time on that buzzword, and it's become a checklist for law enforcement. And I always tell cops, my job is to not be victim centered, and I don't mean that in a negative way. But if I center the victim and I put that victim at the center of the case is. The burden of the case is sitting on their shoulders. So, we have to be trauma informed, and so do the NGO partners as well. And we have to be offender focused. We have to focus our attention on the actions of the criminal. And then when we do that, we marry that trauma informed in the middle with people like you guys who are victim centered, because you're literally centering everything you're doing around them. And blend those two together. But yeah, I mean, there's so many buzzwords that have come. Human trafficking itself has become such a buzzword at this point. I mean, yeah. It's interesting.
No, for sure. It definitely has changed. And I mean, it's funny because we deal with some law enforcement who are super helpful and extremely understanding and have had some, training, and then we deal with others who just seem to have missed the memo that came through about, how to work with survivors of human trafficking and how not to re-traumatize. And I think one of the hardest things that I, as a victims advocate, have to deal with is the re-traumatization of trafficking victims through the prosecution process. Now, we are all aligned here, right? We all want a trafficker to go to jail. So obviously, I am not wanting to block such a process. However, it is extremely difficult to watch that re-traumatization happen with the 47 question or times of questioning and the almost sometimes it feels like disbelief, right? When you're watching this happen and law enforcement is questioning and you're sort of sitting there, being the advocate, being that person telling, survivors to be strong. And I personally, one of my greatest regrets in life is that I didn't prosecute my trafficker, right? Like I wish I had done that. I wasn't brave enough at the time. And I was in no condition at the time. Anyway, I would have made probably the worst witness on earth, right? So, I mean, this is one of the challenges that we face. What advice do you have for law enforcement when it comes to that? Because that is definitely one of the toughest places, right?
Yeah. My advice would be stop it. Stop doing what we're doing. You look at the methodologies that are used by law enforcement in human trafficking, and it's the same historically, right? So when you ask why do we do that, the answer is because that's how it's done. Like that's whatever. Things don't have to be done that way. So one thing I always encourage law enforcement, contrary to most people's popular belief, you can prosecute a human trafficking case without a victim taking the stand, right? And if you talk about what's trauma-informed, that's the most trauma-informed thing you can do. I don't even interview trafficking victims or survivors unless they want to. If I'm working an operation and somebody shows up to the hotel, I literally am standing there in full vest when we answer the door, and I'm just telling them, hey, sheriff's office, come on inside. Do you have any weapons on you? No, go over here and talk to these people. And it's in partner NGO. Unless they come back and say, I want to talk to you, we're done. There's no need. So really the training of law enforcement needs to stop being so much about, there's a big emphasis on victim interview considerations. And I think that's important. But the bigger blurb needs to be, when I worked a murder, I never had a victim show up in court to testify. I never had a victim tell me, hey, this is the guy that shot me, right? But we were able to prove those cases using data, intelligence, interviews of other people. And you can do that in trafficking as well. You can apply the same methodologies that you would use in a homicide investigation to trafficking. It's always icing on the cake if the survivor wants to, talk, but they don't have to. The other thing I would encourage is the use of alternative charging, right? So we get so hung up on the term human trafficking. So in the state of Texas, human trafficking, if it occurs under 30 days and it's an adult, it's punishable by 2 to 20 years in prison, right? So it's for us a second-degree felony. But if I can prove aggravated promotion of prostitution, I can put you in prison for life. So if I can prove promotion without having to prove force, fraud, or coercion via somebody telling me those things, why wouldn't I just go for the ag promotion and put him in jail for life or put him in prison for life? It's that simple, So really looking at the alternative charges is important. I think probably it makes them feel good on the inside to be able to say this was a human trafficking case. It doesn't matter what you charge at the end of the day. It's still a human trafficking case. I can charge money laundering. Doesn't mean it wasn't human trafficking. We're just not moving forward on that particular charge. And I think being able to push back and let go of that sometimes is going to be huge. Just finding something that you can still put somebody in prison that takes that burden off of the survivor.
No, I think that's so important, and it's great to hear law enforcement sort of starting down that, trail, because it is extremely difficult for a survivor just coming out to have to tell that story over and over again, and then to do it in public in a courtroom.
It's interesting. Yeah, totally. So one of the things I do in training is I have everybody in the class write down the most traumatic experience of their entire life. And I tell them, I'm going to read it out loud for everybody. And, you do get some very traumatic stuff, but you also get a lot of joking around or some blanks, which tells me you're not comfortable telling us anonymously about your trauma. But you expect her to sit on the hotel bed that she was just having essentially paid rape was about to occur, and you want her to tell you all that, And then we do some other exercises to demonstrate how something non-traumatic is hard to recall. And I don't want to give it up yet because we'll do it in the training up there. So then I'm able to point out this is a non-traumatic event and you can't even recall this information. Whereas somebody with complex trauma isn't going to be able to recall everything. And the first thing you're going to say is, well, then she's lying. And she's not. It's just that you can't expect the human brain to do that. So yeah, I think, again, it's just really getting cops to have to do a little self-reflection. And at times eat a little bit of crow. That's when they start going, maybe I can do this a different way, and we talk about how many times that story is told. Even if it's the most victim-centered, ideal situation that you could ever have, the story is probably being told 20 times to 100 different people. And if that story isn't linear and it changes at any point over the course of all of that, then they're a liar and we can't move forward on a case. So why don't we just pull all that out and not have to worry about it?
I mean, you're absolutely right. It's been 20 some years since the last time I was trafficked. And I still today, as I, speak, have re-traumatization and have to think about the number of times, hi, hello, this is this is London. She's one of our human trafficking dogs against trafficking dogs. And as you can see, she has a affinity for being on camera. So we're just going to let her calm herself down here. Sorry, guys. She makes interesting television for sure because she definitely believes that she should be, front and center at all times.
That's awesome.
She is in LA working with us as we were, working the streets and stuff. And she has a real affinity for the young ladies. And in fact, tonight she's headed out to work with one of them. But she makes them feel safe. She makes me feel safer when I'm telling my story. But there's still a part of you that just hurts every time you have to explain this, right? And I think that there's something to be said to law enforcement that says, come on, guys, there's text messages, there's email, there's all this other evidence, right? There's all these other pieces. Yeah. Maybe give it a shot because it is really hard to tell it. And the lying part is probably why most survivors don't want to talk to law enforcement because they feel like nobody believes them, right? And it's a very, very difficult line. And I understand the law enforcement's position because they need something that can go to court and be, sellable in court, that someone's going to believe them and a jury is going to work on that, or at least a judge. On the other hand, there are still parts of and I was, trafficked from 16 to 21. So, formative years. And at the same time, there's pieces that still suddenly come out, right? That I've repressed for whatever reason that were particularly traumatic or particularly difficult. And I think that some of that has to be sort of taught, to law enforcement. I know, and we can't wait for you to come and do law enforcement training in June. I just can't wait. So, from the airing of this, it'll be 10 days to the time that you're here. And so June 15th at Judson University, if you'd like to hear the secrets of Detective Scarmucci and some of the other law enforcement and prosecution folks, we are holding a free law enforcement training for law enforcement and prosecutors to come and learn a little bit more about how to do this differently. And, we obviously will be plying you with lots of food and hoping that you guys in law enforcement and prosecution will come and want to learn a little bit more because it is so important. And as victims, we feel really, sometimes in fear of law enforcement when we should want to cooperate with everybody. And I think if we all work together, that can happen. London agrees, as you can see. London 100% agrees. There should be different ways that we work together. And she's like, wait, let's go play, right? But at the same time, she is forever, wanting to provide that comfort. And I know law enforcement wants the same thing. So how we bring that together, I think, is super important in all of this. Any sort of last words before we head out? We got about 5 minutes.
Yeah, I mean, I think that just again looking and having a little bit of self-reflection and looking at how we're investigating crimes and what harms we're doing, all in the name of the belief that we're doing something good. You see a lot too, where a survivor, pours everything out and really does cooperate, and then at the end of the day, no charges are filed. So, what was the point of having to go through that trauma? I think the other thing too is really understanding trauma. I didn't for a very long time, even working human trafficking. I can tell you, we had a very large explosion here several years ago. Killed, I think, 12 firemen, leveled an entire city. It was wild. And I was talking about it in EMDR therapy, and when I got done, the therapist said, "You just talked about it 4 times, and 4 times the story changed." And it wasn't obviously that I'm lying about it. I'm have no reason to. It's that as I was talking through the process of every single thing, I remembered, like you said, certain things now came to mind, or I remembered then, this particular thing happened that I didn't the first time. So just really understanding what trauma looks like, how it manifests, and being able, again, to set those egos aside, to understand that when a victim is uncooperative, it's not because they have a personal hatred for you as a human being. It's that it's not them talking, it's trauma talking. And really being able to understand that and set it aside and say, you know what, like, it's completely cool. Like, we can still work with this, and knowing how. So just understanding that we are intersecting at some of the most horrific times in somebody's life. We're going home at the end of the day, hopefully living a normal life, and they can't always say the same. So, I think it's such an important step to not, I try to tell people, you can't be trauma informed. If you're trauma informed, that means you know about trauma. You have to be trauma sensitive, and you have to understand how you can be informed of it. That's great. But if you're not being sensitive to it, you're probably doing more damage than you are good, all in the name of doing good. So yeah, I think that would be about it in terms of
me. One of the most annoying things that law enforcement asks NGOs to do is during a operation to sit there and basically say, either you can cooperate with law enforcement and then come with me into a nice, safe place, or you're going to jail for the night. What would you say to law enforcement?
Stop. Cut that out. Right? So I think that's interesting, because that is the most common method used. You're 100% right. They bring them in the room and they're like, go with them and talk nice, or go to jail, right? The thing about it that they have to understand is human trafficking, sex trafficking, has nothing to do with prostitution. You cannot be a prostitute and a human trafficking victim. They're not interchangeable. If you're being trafficked, you're not a sex worker. You are literally a victim of crime. So I always ask, because they say, well, we have to arrest them for their own good. Keeps them safe for the night. I love that one. They're like, at least tonight.